The content discussed in this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical or mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, therapist, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a mental health condition. If you are in crisis or think you may have an emergency, please call 911 or contact a local mental health professional or crisis line immediately. Hi, and welcome to the Matriarchy with Lisa and Kath. Gosh, Lisa, can you believe we're already doing episode 4?
I can't believe it. This has happened so quickly, and I'm having so much fun. And although I was told that we need 10 episodes to be a real podcast, so I'm counting them down.
Only 6 more? We've got a couple of more scheduled, so I'm feeling pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm really excited about this episode too. And this was a crowd-requested topic. So our audience members, we are listening. Please give your feedback. But this topic is important, I think, because we live in such a crazy, anxious, divided times. And we can slip so quickly into overwhelm and just put our heads in the sand about everything that's going on. But it's so important not to do that, which is why I'm so excited to talk about our next guest.
Yes, so we are very fortunate to have Harper West with us here today. A little bit about Harper. She is a psychotherapist and an expert in improving relationship with yourself and others through self-acceptance. She is trained in mindful self-compassion and compassion-focused therapy. Even more so, she is an author, she's appointed to the Michigan Board of Psychology, and she serves her community through sitting on the Rochester Hills Library Board. So please welcome Harper West with us today, and just so happy to have you here, Harper.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, I guess we just kind of want to know a little bit about your background and like how you found your voice.
Oh, well, that's an interesting question. Yeah. Oh gosh, as a psychotherapist, I could go on a long time about the work I've done to find my voice. So we'll try to keep that to a minimum. But yeah, let's just say I wasn't always as outspoken and forthcoming and assertive as I am now. I had to get myself in therapy and get myself out of 2 abusive relationships to figure that stuff out. So yeah, there's a long journey and a lot of history there, but basically learned that being assertive and speaking up and finding my voice is essential to who I am, and I think as women, who we all should be. We all do that in different ways, of course, but I have found my voice through writing, through my work as a psychologist, and through public service and activism. So that's, a bit of my story there.
Yeah, so that's, you hit on some things there that are really important, and I do agree with you. For women, it is important to find our voice, and I think for many of us, it's been a journey. I also have been through therapy myself. Has there been anybody that's been...
Me too. Love it. Recommend it to everyone.
Highly recommend. And it's a privilege to be able to go through therapy. And so, yeah, we do recommend that for anybody who, is struggling to find their voice or with anything. And I also, has there been any women in your life that were inspirations that sort of led you to this, to this point?
Certainly. My mother, speaking of matriarchs, is certainly a person I unconsciously, of course, as a kid, and then later more consciously really copied. She was her own sort of low-key activist and had her own voice in a little bit different way, but she was very much a community activist and the very grassroots type, with everything from the local parks to she was active in the Michigan Bottle Bill back in 1975-76, gathering signatures and getting that on the
The bottle bill?
for voters, the bottle bill, which
Oh,
got
the
us the
bottle
10
bill.
cents. Yeah, it was called the bottle bill.
Okay.
And I helped gather signatures on that when I was a kid. Don't tell the state, but yeah, she was real active in that because she was a bike rider and a runner and a walker and saw so much trash. And in the 70s, those of us who grew up in the 60s and 70s, the roadsides were lined with trash, and she was really objected to this. And they knew that if they could get a 10 cent deposit on bottles, that would clean up a lot of the trash automatically, right? People just wouldn't throw it out the windows. And it's worked. It's kept millions, billions of tons of trash out of landfills, which I think is a wonderful legacy for her to have had among, among her
Absolutely.
compatriots. So I saw that early kind of activism. She was active in her church and as a bird watcher and as an environmentalist. And so I've also continued working as an environmentalist. I was instrumental in helping my town, Rochester Hills, get a recycling and solid waste plan that was fought for 15 years. The city council and the mayor pushed back against it and fought and fought and fought, even though it was financially advantageous to the residents, would reduce our solid waste bill. They just fought against it because it was government overreach, all the things we still hear about today. But finally, about 10, 15 years ago, the city council revived it and passed it, and we've had a comprehensive recycling program. And so that's my sort of throwback activism to my mom and her influence. So long answer to say my mother was a good model for a citizen activist.
I love hearing that. And what a wonderful role model to show you that you can collect signatures and make a significant impact. And then to see you do something very similar in your own town. And you are on the Rochester Library Board. So thank you for that. And can you tell us what you've learned about serving on a library board and what advice you would give to people about public service?
Okay, yeah, sure. Certainly, it was not something that I ever intended to do. Certain Lisa Kiefer asked me to run. Yeah, and so I got hooked in. Who's that? But thanks to her, I mean, I'm glad I'm doing it. It was an easy reach to do. Oh gosh, so many lessons. Running is an experience, talking to citizens, knocking on doors, going to public events and just, talking to everybody. I've knocked a lot of doors in my life as an activist and mostly in partisan politics. But when you're the candidate, it's a little different, putting yourself out there.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
it was different if anyone has run, but it was also really gratifying and people were really thankful. A lot of people said, thank you for running. And now they say, thank you for serving. So it is gratifying to get that. And I'm happy to do it because it is a little way that I can give back to the community, help keep our library on a solid path financially. And also I specifically ran on the slogan of freedom to read to fight back against some of the conservative right-wing extremist efforts to ban books and increase censoring in our libraries. And so I'm proud to, put a foothold on the library board in regards to that. But it's a wonderful thing to know that you're helping the community, and I would encourage everybody to do it. There's a lot of opportunities, city council seats, planning commissions. You can volunteer on lots of committees and commissions in most townships and cities and even at the county level. So I encourage everybody to be
Yeah.
a citizen activist in their own way.
Yeah, I think a lot of people forget about those commission seats, and you don't have to run for them. You just apply for them, and you get appointed by the city council or whatever local government is doing the appointing. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That's a good point.
Yeah. And I think it can seem out of reach for people to be like, what are you talking about? I could never run for office. I could never do that. But it's just people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very normal. The people on the library board are just average citizens like you and me. People on city councils or township boards are just average citizens, and it does not take anything special, just an interest in your community to run. A lot of people get intimidated, think like a lot of people assume you have to be a librarian to be on the library board. No, actually, no. We're all just citizens, and the same with things like city council or township boards. They're just citizens. There's no special requirement other than citizenship in your community.
Yeah. And I think that speaks to of the need or the importance of being local. Like the national politics is so crazy and state level as well. And this leads into our next question, right? But before we get into all of that, we really can make a difference locally.
Absolutely.
really important.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you. Thank you for doing that, Harper. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, people tend to forget that because they focus on the national headlines that state level and down is where a lot of the rubber hits the road with these things. A lot of our government dollars flow through, like county government here in Oakland County, where I live. Is one of the largest governmental entities. It has millions and billions of dollars of tax revenues that it spends. It's crazy. People don't think about that county commission and the county board, and they just don't even think about that. It's a big governmental entity and bigger than a lot of cities and states, and people don't really think about that. And there's ways to influence those votes that really have a major difference in your roads, in your parks, in your community.
Roads, parks, mental health, affordable housing, like those boards, the county boards and some of the other local boards, they affect so many of these issues that, lean into what we're going to be talking about today. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
So when I was looking into your background and reading your bio on your website, I was really excited to see the work that you're doing on self-compassion. I went through a period a couple years ago myself where I was like, had to learn so much more. And I'm like, I don't understand why I'm feeling this way more than a couple years ago. And then I discovered the work of Kristen Neff and read Fierce Self-Compassion. And it was such a game changer. And for me, it really helped develop some skills in myself and have self-compassion and to drop the judgment. And it's easier to drop the judgment on other people when you drop it on yourself. And I'm like, oh, that's actually really nice. And we live in this near constant anxiety state. We're getting news bombarded. It seems designed to be distracting and chaotic and divisive. And we'll talk about the impact on social media and the impact that has on us. But before we get into that, what I really didn't understand is how emotions work, to be honest. Like people, when I was little and I'd be sad, people say, don't be sad. And then I'm like, okay, but I'm sad and I don't know how to not be sad. Now I feel bad that I'm sad. So it's just the basic skills of mental health. And I was wondering if you could talk about how to develop some basic skills.
Sure, there's so many things to say regarding that, of course, but self-compassion and generating compassion for others is so healing and so restorative. And unfortunately, in the Western culture, that's not often how we're raised. We're raised to be very judgmental. We're raised to be judgmental of ourselves, comparative with others. I'm not good enough. I'm better than, and especially as women, I think there's a lot of judgments and comparisons that we can probably point to that we're messages, cultural messages. And that judging mind is a fear-based mind. It's an inadequacy-based mind, right? I'm not good enough. I'm different than. I'm unworthy. And so anytime we get into a fear-based mind, we're not going to be our best selves, right? We're not going to be our wise mind. I always think of with a thinking brain and the emotional brain, and in the middle, when we combine those two, the Venn diagram in the middle is wise mind, right? But when we're in our fear brain, we're in our emotional brain, and we're not thinking. We're in fight or flight, right? And so that automatically, that judgment is going to be unhelpful, in a psychological way. And so, that's a basic construct of compassion-based work, is dialing back that, I call it the caboose of judgment that we add on to thoughts. We may have a thought like, should I wear that dress today? And then we add on this caboose of judgment. That dress makes me look fat. That's a bad color on me. Everyone's going to think I'm dressed up too much. Right? We're going to add some caboose of judgment. The original thought is not the problem. It's the caboose of judgment we add on to that then triggers us into fear brain. And so if we can bring a sense of compassion, we can decouple the fear from the shame and judgment. And now that's real power. That's mental health. We're going to still feel the concern. Is that dress good for me? Should I wear that dress? Is that a good looking dress? but we're not going to add on this fear-based thinking that spirals us then into anxiety or depression or any kind of labels we can put on that. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's
No,
Yeah.
that was really good explanation of it. I like that. Okay, so taking that to where we are now, so the first piece is obviously the mental health, that we understand our emotions, we try to stay in our wise mind and not in our fear mind, but yet today, as the life we're living, we are just, it's just an onslaught of news and social media and just people around us everywhere. There's really some terrible, terrible things happening. And I mean, so they're real things. It's not just something we're afraid of. They're real things that are happening. But then there's also the fear of what else could happen. So this is a big topic, I know, but could you start us on it? Could you, like, how can we start to manage that so that we can keep our head above water?
Yeah, it's exactly true. And I've read so many articles other people are writing about this subject. How do we manage this overwhelm and this onslaught? I mean, I just opened up the Washington Post in the morning and reading the headlines, and I was just glancing at it, and it's of course these headlines even in the Washington Post are: businesses brace for impact of tariffs. Nuclear weapons age is scary. You can just go down the list, right? Will Wall Street call Trump's bluffs? It's just, big, scary words. And that's just in a mainstream publication, much less in the more extreme ones. So how do we manage this? This is a challenge, even for people, who've practiced this skill. First is to recognize emotions. A lot of people think we should, dissociate or ignore emotions. We do need to recognize them. We need to, again, think about, we have a rational brain and an emotional brain. We need both of those components to get that wise mind in the middle of that diagram. So we need to listen to and honor those emotions, but then we do need the rational brain to manage them, right? So if we read a headline that says tariffs are going to destroy the world economy, right? We have to hear the fear in there. We have to honor that fear, that anxiety. That's a legitimate concern. We need our rational brain to balance that. And that's the wisdom and the work we all do. That's the journey we're all on every day, is how do I find that wise mind in between all of that? And to also recognize that fear can lead us to a sense of anger. I've given talks on the word that I love, which is indignation. Indignation is a form of anger that says our dignity is being taken away. Some rights are being harmed, or we're being harmed in some way. And I love that word because anger can get a bad rep, right? Anger is just out of control, anger. Indignation is a steely form of anger that says something's wrong here and I'm pissed about it. And I'm going to do something about it. Okay, so I really love to focus on that emotion. If you're feeling angry, if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling upset, I bet what you're feeling might be indignation, that the wrong things are happening and you're pissed about it. So I love to highlight that word with people to get them to channel that indignation, because now that tells us, oh, I know what to do. My action with my wise mind is to take fierce, compassionate action, right? Like you said, Kathy, and say, I need to take action on this thing that is wrong, this harm that is being happened. Medicaid is being stolen from 40 million people. That makes me indignant. I will now take action to call Congress and say, Medicaid shouldn't be stolen.
Anger is a call to action. It can be a call to action when used well, I think. But I'm curious about this word indignation versus outrage, because we get a lot of outrage where the media, even the Washington Post, and right, like these headlines, after a while, I'm like, I can't with, it's just constant outrage, and that's not good for my mental health.
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess haven't really thought about the distinction between those two, but maybe, to me, maybe the sense is, again, that indignation is a steely, motivation to take action rather than just spout off, outrage. Maybe would be a way to distinguish those two.
Yeah.
Yeah, talking about outrage, that's one of the things that somewhere along the line I realized I was spending way too much time in outrage. To me, there is a difference between sort of indignation and outrage, and in how it feels in my body. And for me, a lot of what is in media is designed to stoke outrage, and it's a real struggle to see it and not feel that, right? Like how, do you have any advice on that? Like when we see and hear things, whether they're true or not, by the way. That's another thing. Just even like parsing through social media or news sources, and how much of this is actually true, how much of it is not true at all, how much of it is a piece of it's true, but not really the whole picture. But anyways, it's really hard not to feel outraged seeing this. But I swear, I just it's a lot in your body to be feeling that outrage. Do you have any advice around that?
Yeah, this is hard because, right, all I have to do is open up the homepage of the Washington Post and,
Yeah.
bing, 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 bing. One of the things I do is I do read kind of the headlines and the blurbs and just kind of to get an overall sense. But then I just try to pick issues that I care about and that I want to focus on because I can't do it all. It's just not possible. So I focus on, specific issues that I want to be targeted and active on. Library issues being one. I track, one of my volunteer gigs is I track legislation for a social justice coalition in Michigan. And so we have 10 topics that we focus on in the Michigan legislative arena. And so I read the Michigan news for those issues. The other stuff, don't really, I can't. I can't get outraged about sewage overflows into Lake Huron. As important as that is, that's not on our 10 list, and that's not on my values list that I have to focus on. I just can't. Sorry, Lake Huron. Someone else is going to have to grab that issue. I can't. And so some of our outrage is just finding topics I think that you manage and can then actively get involved in, hopefully. Because when we then take action, now we're taking that fear and that anxiety and putting it, into action. And when we think about fight or flight, right, where we need to mobilize into action. Okay, mobilize into action. Write a letter, go to a protest, push some legislation through the state house that addresses sewage overflows in Lake Huron, if that's your gig, right? So action then can give a sense of purpose and not just pointless outrage.
Not everyone can fight every fight. And that's why we have a community, because people have different interests and people have, they're going to fight a fight that's going to be different than yours. And thank God for that. And staying out of overwhelm, I think, is really important. And so maybe it's kind of like when raising kids, you got to pick your battles.
Yeah, I think to some degree, I think this onslaught that's come out of the national, Trump administration is designed to overwhelm our senses and get us in that state of outrage where we don't know which, whack-a-mole to hit, right? Which issue to address. And I know they designed it that way in this first few months of the administration to get us disoriented so we don't know how to, target these attacks. So don't fall for it.
How about social media? Double-edged sword.
Yeah, well, social media again, is like I think you said, right? It's designed to provoke, those clickbait headlines and those so people hit like or the angry emoji and again, it's just a distractor. If it's not leading to productive activism, it's really just a distractor. So recognize what it's doing to you. Again, I think, finding those emotions, I think, as Lisa said, in your body and knowing that if it's just hyping you up and making you outraged and hypervigilant, I'm not sure that's productive.
It's not helpful.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I think another piece that you sort of touched on and we'd like to explore a little bit is so like we could each pick 1 to 2 issues that that really resonate with us and focus on it. I think that's really a wise piece of advice. And so that kind of leads to community, right? So because we're sort of leaning on community to pick up the other ones, but we're also going to be, working with people in the community on the ones that we're interested in. Can you talk a little bit about how important community is to mental health and to, to getting through this time?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a great question, Lisa, because much of the research around depression, specifically, shows that when people are depressed, it's because they're socially isolated. They don't have friends, family, community connections. They don't feel connected to a higher calling. And there's some fascinating research around one of the best treatments for depression is volunteer work, is have people go volunteer for a cause that's bigger than them, right? Many people who are depressed are kind of self-centered, and this is again not a criticism. It's just when we're in fight or flight, we tend to hunker in, and when we're anxious, we go into self-preservation, survival mode. When we're in safety mode, right? We're not in fight or flight. We're in safety. We can be generous, compassionate to others. We can engage with helping, right? We can do one of the modes for safety is tend and befriend, is a little phrase we use, right? When we're in safety zone, we call it the ventral vagal system, we can tend and befriend. We can be nurturing, we can caregive, we can be compassionate to others. We can't do that in fight or flight. When we're in fight or flight mode, we're self-centered. We're all about us. I got to survive. Screw y'all, right? And so when we're giving back to our community, we're helping place ourselves in a sense of safety, a sense of togetherness, a sense of unity, a sense of humanness. This is who we are as humans. We're social animals. When we engage as social animals with each other, we feel safe. We calm, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It takes a lot of mental energy to navigate this social divide. Lisa and I talk a lot about community and how we're wired for community, and yet sometimes, how do you keep certain relationships functional without sacrificing our own values? So, and what I mean by that is sometimes there's pressure to conform, or like a purity test, if you will. Are you right enough? Are you left enough? Are you conservative enough? Or do you believe everything, every issue exactly like I do? And if not, you're wrong. And navigating that, because on the big picture, well, I think most people agree on the big picture anyway. It's just how to get there. But how do we do so with a focus on collaboration and progress, and not eating our own when perfection is the enemy of the good?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. A lot of people are doing that, I think, nowadays. Right, if you don't agree with me 100%, then you're not in my life, and that's
you're a
hard
bad
because
person, and it makes you a bad
right?
person.
Yeah, and I think that's been a product of a lot of the discourse at the national level has kind of set that tone. I'm old enough to remember when we had a lot of disagreements about the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights era and women's rights, and I was involved somewhat in the nuclear arms race issues of the 80s, and nuclear proliferation issues, and there were a lot of issues that are pretty important that we've always had division over, but hopefully, as at the end of the day, we can all be Americans and citizens of this country, and know that we all have a goal, that maybe there's some differences around the margins, but we have a goal around that. But that is not the message. Unfortunately, today it's very much who's on the team and who's off the team, and it's a hard one. It really is. This is, again, we're social animals, and every relationship involves reciprocity, involves some sort of compromise. Nobody's a clone of me. If I go looking for the person who's exactly like me, A, that's boring, and B, it's impossible. And the goal is to engage, with good heart and compassion and patience with others, and try to find common ground. And unfortunately, that's a bit of a dying art, I think. The art is in discord and division, and it's sad. It's really sad.
How much do you think of that the dying art of it is due to social media, and then just sort of being able to go to your little corner of the world and not even interact with other people?
Yeah, no, I think, Lisa, you're right. That seems to be what a lot of people think has made it much worse. You can find your echo chamber, and you don't have to know that there's a few people out there who might disagree, or even engage with them in a way that's productive. Yeah, it is. It's a sad, I don't know how this is going to roll out, but here we are.
I remember reading a book and listening to a podcast called The Sum of Us, which I thought was really interesting. And it's about keeping your eye on the prize, right? You can align with, you could, there's strange bedfellows sometimes. You're aligned on certain issues. I think the perspective is that there's people trying to manipulate us because there's a lot of money in that and a lot of power. And there's this power imbalance and this wealth inequality that has reached epic proportions and is unsustainable, sorry. And what it's forcing or what it's aiming to do is getting us to infight instead of banding together as this David versus Goliath. It's just David fighting other Davids, right? And it keeps the Goliath in power.
I would agree. It does seem to be that's what's going on. And so it is, I think a matter of, trying to engage, with each other over finding common ground, and that it can be hard when we're being pulled so much in the other direction, but to try and find common ground. Yeah. One of the co-authors of a book that I helped write called The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, Bill Doherty, he founded a group called Better Angels. Now it's called Braver Angels. And he's trying to get, red and blue together to talk about this. And I had him write a chapter in a journal that I was editing and talk about this issue and it's hard. It is an effort. We have to stay open-minded and compassionate with others and see the good intentions in there. It's a struggle because, again, if we get back to the basic psychology, our fear brain wants to see division and difference. That's how our primitive cave person brain is designed. It's designed to look out in the world and see danger and find differences. We have to work hard with our wise mind to overcome that natural tendency to see problems and see differences, to consciously lean in and see that there's some common ground. But again, it's hard again when the whole media environment is designed to do the opposite.
You saying there's no easy shortcuts? Can't we all just get along?
Yeah, be nice. It's a big topic, but important. An important one as we hopefully move forward and heal. In this country, it's an important topic. I wish there was a magic wand to fix it.
Yeah, one of the things that Kath and I have been kind of exploring, I don't know if you saw that President Obama with his Democracy Forum, it was talking about pluralism and how pluralism has been what's made our country so successful, which is, basically, these different coalitions coming together for a common goal. And we have so many common goals in this country that I would think that, the majority, if not almost all people, everybody wants peace and, be able to raise their families happily in a healthy environment. And, again, you kind of already said it, Harper, that we maybe look at it from a different angle, what we think, how we get there. But I think in the end, we all want these things, right? So,
right. Yeah. Hopefully enough of these leaders can speak up and keep moving us in that direction. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, hopefully.
And start to bridge the divide.
And then, of course, there is the point that some people are facing real worries, though, right now. And I guess we don't want to skip over that part. I mean, when so a lot of people can look at the stock market and the fluctuations, and maybe they have enough money that in the end, I mean, sure, they don't want to lose any money, but they're going to be okay. But there's a lot of people that aren't, and then the whole bunch of other issues, and when you have families being affected by immigration issues or, food supply issues. I mean, there's just so much out there. So can you speak to that a little bit? Like if you're facing something that is really, truly detrimental, do you have any advice on, how to get through with that?
Wow, yeah, that's also a good question, and maybe a good therapist could help if you can do it. But it's legitimate. I mean, I have people every day who have insecure housing, and their rent is so high that they have 6 roommates. in a mobile home trailer, right? Like it's a thing. I mean, this is a thing, and they're working 3 jobs. I mean, these are people who are struggling, with high expenses and high, costs for living, and so it's a legitimate issue. And health insurance and access to health and mental health care is just our mental health and physical health system is so antiquated. Why we don't have universal health care is mind-boggling to me. So I see these things every day, people who don't get access to things they need because of the way our system is designed. And yeah, that affects them directly. They're, literally every day in fear of, not making the bills and losing their car or losing a job because their company's going out of business. So this is hard to manage these daily fears, because this definitely puts us into fight or flight, right? And as it should. I mean, that's what the fear is designed to do, is to tell us, hey, this is a legitimate danger right here in front of me. But the same rule still applies. We still need to engage our wisest mind as best as we can and think it through, right? It's harder to do when it's a direct fear, a direct danger, like your kid's not going to have health insurance or something. That's a legitimate danger. And so all we can do is be our best human self and move forward, with our wisest mind. It's a struggle, though. That is the struggle.
Yeah, it's a daily struggle. Yeah. And I think it speaks also to the importance of staying in community as well. So it's Pride Month, and a lot of our LGBTQ community members especially our trans folks, are being targeted. And what advice can you give for people who feel like their very identity they're threatened?
Yeah, again, that's a difficult one, because the facts are that they are being targeted, and that's an existential issue where their identity is being targeted. And again, that is very hard. That's going to trigger fears. That is going to trigger anxieties, and I feel so bad for those people, and it is really a struggle. I hope we can, as a community, band together and provide them some sense of safety, that we will stand as allies with them, but it's an increasingly challenging time for them, and other minorities and immigrants and disenfranchised people. Yeah, it's scary.
I found too that you might be surprised at who you can rely on. There's can be people from across the aisle who might offer you encouragement, and it could be something small and unrelated. And I think this is where we're not asking people to befriend people that are going to harm them, but to try and be open enough to accept people. I guess I don't know exactly where I'm going with this. I just know that, I think back to one of my favorite quotes from Mr. Rogers, and that's, when things are scary, his mother would say to him, look for the helpers. You'll always find people that are helping. And they're not always the people that you think. I'm adding that last part. R.I.P. Mr. Rogers. But I found that's true. I'm really surprised that someone that I thought I could rely on let me down. And someone that I never thought would have my back did. And so keeping open, if I'm trying to maintain an open vulnerability enough that I can see people for their actual humanity and not for this ideological divide.
Yeah, that's great if you can. That is really, but I think that is also the challenge, because I have friends who are in the gay community, and they, their family and friends voted with Trump and directly against them. And they literally were telling them, if you vote for Republicans, you are voting against us. We're married, and you are literally voting against our right to be married. We could potentially not be able to stay married. And they, that's a hard, how do you look at a family and or a friend, a member of your family, and say, you voted literally to abolish my identity and maybe even my ability to be married or hold a job, have housing. Who knows where this could lead, right? And so how, but there are other people who are allies and who will support, but I think that betrayal is a really big problem nowadays when we look out and see that 75 million or whatever, 77 million people voted to betray women, minorities, the LGBT community, the environment, civil rights, equal rights. I mean, that betrayal is a moral emotion that we should all feel. Again, indignation, right?
Indignation,
That
yeah.
and that's
Yeah,
and
right,
how
just
do we butt that
indignation.
up against? Right, as you say, Kath. Finding allies, finding communities, finding our humanness when we look out and see that millions and millions of people voted against humanity, voted against what I think is best for humankind, and that is that's a that's a tough one to square. That's a really tough one
It
to
is.
square.
It is very tough. And, um, I'm sure there's all sorts of stories in that 75 million and of why they did it. And I think it kind of does get back to the point of we need to have those conversations and we need to have, some better understanding, of those folks, and they need to understand, the people that they voted against too. So it's really important. I think this community part and like what the man that you mentioned who's doing the building bridges work. I mean, this is just really important work right now. So yeah.
And it's also important, though, and I'm showing my privilege, right? Because I have the privilege to be a bit more open because it's not threatening me directly. But I think it's also important to have the strong values or strong boundaries around your values. And you don't have to leave yourself open to people that are threatening you directly. And so I guess there's a balance.
You have to use your wise mind. I just love that. I'm going to be using that all the time now, Harper.
Yeah. Is that your wise mind, Lisa?
You do, absolutely do. And this is the hard part of our messy human relationships, right? Our messy humanness is, again, we're not clones of each other. We're going to have differences. And this goes back to our caveman days, right? Where we're going to have differences about, you ate too much salmon and I wanted some of your antelope, right? We're going to have conflicts over things and we have to resolve those or we're not going to live in community well. And this is the
100%.
challenge. And I work with this in couples therapy and family therapy, right? It sounds silly, but this is what it's about. How do we compromise? I'm doing too many chores. You're not doing enough chores. How do we compromise on this? And it sounds petty, but this is a core aspect of how we get along and live in common humanity together and be in right relationship with each other. And that is the struggle. That is the human struggle. And we're seeing it writ large nationally in politics, but it comes down to neighbors fighting over how tall the fence should be and why should you mow your lawn on Friday night when I don't want you to mow your lawn on Friday night, right? All of these things we butt up against each other. Every spectrum of this, right?
Yeah, and how and just the word that came to my mind when you were talking about that is really empathy, right? And so trying to understand the other person's point of view. And even when we were just talking about the 75 million, I think there's been in many cases there's just a failure of empathy. They don't understand what it means when these rights are taken away and how seriously it affects people, right?
I'd like to go back to a little bit what we started talking about at the beginning, which is action. I do think action is the antidote to anxiety. And if maybe you could explain a little bit about that psychologically, how that works in our brains, in our bodies, and how can we move from anxiety to action?
Sure.
And
Great
what
question,
action
Shay.
means. It could mean different things for people, right?
For sure. Oh, 100%. Yeah, there's so many ways to be active. Yeah, so this, the psychology, the nerdy part of this is that we have a nervous system.
Bring it on. I love the nerdy. Bring on the nerdy.
I can nerd out. I will nerd out on psychology for sure. Bear with me, but it's pretty simple. It's just important to know we have part of our nervous system is called the vagus nerve, the vagal nervous system. And it's a big nerve that runs from our brain all the way through our body. Vagal stands for wandering, the Latin for wandering.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, and it wanders all over our body, but it mainly controls our primary, our heart, our lungs, our digestive system, and our fight or flight system, basically. So our nervous system goes both ways, right? We send signals out from our brain that says, pick up this pen, drink this water, and we also get nervous signals, right? We touch a hot stove, that goes up to our brain, and we have a reaction. So this vagus system is deeply involved in that. So when we're in our best self, when we're in our wisest mind, we're in our vagal system and we're in it's called kind of safety zone. We're calm, we can regulate our breathing, we can regulate our brain, we can regulate our heart, we can be safe. We're safe, right? We call this the tend and befriend system. We can be social and engaged and empathic and all of these things. We can rest and digest is the other phrase we use. This calmness allows us to digest our food because when we're in fight or flight, we don't digest our food well. We can breathe deep. Yeah, so this affects our digestive system, constipation, diarrhea, heartburn, all these digestive problems are because we're in stress and not in safety. So that's the vagus system. That's when we're in safety. When we go into fight or flight, this is the sympathetic nervous system, and we are mobilized to do something, flee or fight. So we're mobilized. So this gets to the answer of activation. And activism, basically, we mobilize ourselves to take action to keep ourselves safe in a primal sense. And when we mobilize ourselves, we can then get back into safety. We're doing something to rectify the situation to get ourselves. We run from the bear. We're safe. Right. In compassion work, we literally put our hands on our heart and feel compassion. And what we're doing is we're activating our safety system. So this is how we think of activism: is we're getting activated by a danger. There's a fear, and we mobilize in fight or flight, and then we get back into our safety system. Okay, so that's a little bit of nerdiness. If we get even higher into that fear system, we go into the dorsal vagal system, and this is where we see depression, big air quotes there. Depression, this is where we go into the fold or freeze system, where we literally kind of collapse, we give up, we're hopeless, helpless, demobilized. We're not mobilized. Fight or flight is mobilized, do something. Dorsal vagal is, I'm going to die anyway, I might as well give up. And this is literally also a primal response to fear. But also mobilizing out of that gets us back into our safety zone. So that's a little bit of nerdiness around why we should activate, because activation gives us mobilization towards safety.
When you were saying flight or flight, in my mind, I'm like, I tend to freeze. And so I've heard fight, flight, and freeze, but I never thought about freeze being like a different level.
Yeah, it is actually a different activation of the dorsal vagal. It's a dorsal vagal system. It's slightly different. If you've ever fainted, that's an extreme version of this response. When we get, and it sounds pretty gruesome, but literally if we were being eaten by a lion, we would go up into this dorsal vagal response because it's a way to avoid the pain of death. Our nervous system shuts down. I know it sounds gruesome, but this is literally preparation for death. If we look at it from a very primal.
Interesting. That is really interesting.
It's bizarre.
That's dark, Harper.
It's dark.
But it's good to know. Like, it's good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it is, because this is our nervous system's way of helping us deal with danger, right? If we're mobilized, we go, "Ooh, there's a lion, let's run," that's mobilized, that's helpful, or, let's hunker down and avoid the lion. But when we get to be eaten by the lion, again, sorry, dark, we should have a disclaimer, but if we're that far along, if we feel the dangers that much, we kind of collapse and go, I'm going to faint, I'm going to freeze, I'm going to fold, I'm going to just be hopeless, helpless, depressed, immobilized.
And so if I can extrapolate this out into like the times, I've had people, and I felt this myself too. I'm like, I can't, it's just too overwhelming. I shut down, I put my head in the sand. I can't read the headlines. Like for me personally, I try to read the headlines and move away and go about my day. And then when I find myself being sucked back in, I'm like, okay, but I'm doing something. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I found that, like, for me, that kind of works. But I think a lot of people are stuck in this overwhelm. So are they like, well, I'm just going to die? Like, we're all going to die anyway.
Listeners, please don't do that.
No, but I mean, that is how a lot of people are choosing to react. Or maybe they're not choosing it, but that's how they are reacting is like, I can't read the news. I can't do anything. I'm just going to put my head in the sand and go about my day. Is that wrong? Is that,
Well, that feels like avoidance to me. Maybe that's like different than. I mean, I don't know. What do you say, Harper?
It's a good, yeah, I think maybe it could be either. It sounds like it is just avoid, which can be a good coping strategy. Avoidance can be a coping strategy when you
Yeah.
do recognize, oh, that overwhelm is getting too much. I think I'll check away from, check out of the news headlines.
Yeah.
That can be a good coping strategy. Again, we're kind of back to wise mind because then we have to decide, is it unhealthy? See, avoidance can reach an unhealthy level, right? If I just go,
Right.
oh, I don't need to worry about my bills. I'm not gonna pay my bills, and then my car gets repossessed. That's a problem. That's an avoidance where it's an unhealthy coping strategy, right? So
Right.
we have to then choose wisely about how much do I manage this stress by avoiding it, or do I need to lean in a little bit and see what's
Yeah.
going on?
So the nerdiness in me needs to parse it through. So if you're in this, if you're in your good place, the vagus nerve system, is that what you said?
Ventral vagal.
Ventral vagal. So if you're in that good place, but you're doing avoidance, are you trying to keep yourself in that good place by avoiding? Is that kind of where it's at, or is it like you're actually in the bad place where you think you're gonna die, and you're just avoiding those feelings? Like, or is it a little bit of both?
Yeah. It could be, yeah, it could be a little bit of both. That's a good question. I don't really, this is where it gets subjective. You have to check in
Yeah.
with yourself and think about,
Yeah.
am I truly, helping myself stay safe and calm? Is that, going
Yeah.
to be helpful for me to avoid the headlines? Or is it an avoidance as an unhealthy coping? And that's really subjective. I think that's going to be down
Person
to
to
each person
person.
to sort
Yeah.
of figure that.
and I think also something that we don't talk enough about is just being in discomfort is different than fear. And you have to have some level of discomfort to grow, to listen, to have empathy. And, we just want what feels good.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. Could you weigh in on
Good
that,
point.
Harper?
No, it's a great point, right?
Yeah.
You're exactly right. When we think about growth mindset, which is a concept in psychology, you're 100% right, Kath. We've got to push through some discomfort because if we just sit in comfort all the time, we're never going to push ourselves, to challenge ourselves, whether it's intellectually or with activism or even physically, right? We don't get better at a sport unless we push ourselves a little bit. We don't learn any new skills if we just keep repeating the same chords on the piano, right? I mean, it's we've got to push ourselves. Yeah,
Get comfortable being uncomfortable.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I work with so many children today. I think they're being raised by parents who are very loving, but very this gentle parenting, and they don't want to push kids very much. Every time a kid gets a little distressed, they go, "Oh, my kid's upset. I better not push them very hard." And I'm like, you might want to rethink that.
It is
So,
so hard to watch your child struggle. It's the hardest.
yeah, it is.
Any
But
advice you
that's
could
how they
give
get. That's
parents?
how they. Yeah. It is. I get it. It's hard. If you have empathy, right, you don't want to see somebody struggle, but that's how kids get stronger. That is how they develop those muscles of resilience. They fall down and they get back up and they ride the bike again, right? And you just have to know that in the long term, it's for their own good to toughen them up, but it is hard to see them struggle.
Well, I think we tend to feel responsible for our kids, right? And not just like obviously you're a parent, you're responsible for your kids, but responsible for their emotions. So, like a parenting win for me was when my oldest son was away at college and he called me and he was really distressed about something and I listened and I was like, I'm not going to give advice. I'm not going to give advice. And like he figured it out. And I was like, it's not my problem. And he did it and he figured it out. And I was like, I'm glad I can be a safe person. But it's still so hard because you just want to solve it and fix it.
For sure, it is. I think that was a good parenting choice, right? Let him work it through, and as long as it wasn't life-threatening, he'll probably be better off having dealt with it, right? Because now he gets to own the success, right? Which is definitely something you want kids to do. And if it fails, then you own the failure. He doesn't learn either of those ways. So, yeah.
And it's important that like I as a parent don't take it on. It really, there's a lot of things that are there, whether they're not getting a good grade or whatever. Like you feel like a failure as a parent, but really it's not your problem. My parents never thought that. They would, that was not a thing when I was growing up. If I got a bad grade, they'd be like, well, what happened? They wouldn't be like, oh, I'm so.
Yeah.
The parenting has changed.
It's a struggle.
Everyday struggle.
So are we ready for the ending question, guys? The big question?
I think so.
All right, Harper, what does the matriarchy mean to you?
The question. Well, I think I've already talked about my mom and how her, influence on me was so influential. But I think to me, I think a lot about a book I read many, many years ago that was actually very, very nerdy about the ancient matriarchal cultures that we came out of. And this gets super nerdy, but for tens or hundreds of thousands of years, human cultures were all matriarchies. All of them around the world were matriarchies. And nowadays, since the last 3,000 years, when we developed agriculture and we needed men to defend our lands, we've had patriarchies mostly. And I think women that need to be constantly reminded that we are strong. We were the leaders of humankind for hundreds of thousands of years. We were the spiritual leaders, the governmental leaders, the human relations leaders in our communities and everywhere around the world. And we tend to just defer to men because they're culturally now considered the leaders. Even with all the feminist, post-feminist movements we've had, the matriarchy is us women. We are the leaders and we should own that. And that is my message.
I think I need to read this book.
It. I don't know. I gotta do some more reading. But that's good. I love
Speaking of nerding out.
Yeah. So, well, thank you for that. That was excellent. And we'll have to get that book name and we'll put it on our website. I think it's not talked about enough that, there were matriarchal societies for a long time in human evolution. So thank you. Harper, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and
your wise mind.
Your wise mind with us. And a little bit about your journey and your mother. And it's just really great to get to know you more. And thank you for joining us on the Matriarchy.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you, Harper.
Good luck with your podcast.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks again. That was so interesting.
That was amazing. She's so well spoken, and I took so many notes on this. I love the concept of the wise mind versus the fear mind. That was really, really interesting. And also a reminder to all the women out there, you can't do it all. Pick 1 to 2 things that are your causes that you're going to go after. I know I started falling into that trap that I wanted to be everywhere for everybody, like every cause, and you just can't. It's not possible. You've got to let other folks in the community pick up some of that work and just focus on the things that are most important to you. What do you think, Kath?
I once got a magnet that said, "Stop me before I volunteer again."
I gotta sit on my hands.
No. No is a complete sentence.
Exactly. But sometimes I have to say it in my wise mind. It's like, it must be my fear mind that's like, you gotta do this and you gotta do that. My wise mind has to kick in
It's
no.
like, girl, no, you don't.
100%.
I think there's a balance, right? And I like to keep busy, and I know you like to keep busy, Lisa, and that's fine and that's good, and we're, competent women, and it feels really good to be capable. It feels good to be needed too, you know, but there's a balance. And I think this is a constant daily struggle that my husband reminds me of a lot.
Mine too. Yes.
Um, yeah, you don't have to do it all because you have to remember what you're saying yes to. You're saying no to something else, and that just might be yourself and your mental health.
True. True. Yeah.
And also, if volunteering too much is not your thing and you find yourself going down overwhelm, try volunteering a little bit. And we're not talking anything major, just literally any little step will make you feel like you are influencing the outcome instead of just being barraged but with the input of information. Like the moment you take a little bit of control, whether it's just picking up the phone and calling a congressperson that say you don't like this, or you're volunteering in a garden, whatever.
We forget how many different ways there are to help. There's so many options, and it could just be taking in your neighbor's garbage cans for them,
Yeah.
right? Like if you have an elderly neighbor or someone that's just, going through some struggles right now, you could do some simple things for them. There's so much that we can do to help each other, and I do absolutely agree that is the antidote to anxiety, despair, depression. It's just and yeah, absolutely start slow, like, and then you got to sit on your hands after a while. Like, oh, there's more. But yeah, but we do have to also rely on the rest of the community to pick up things, because we can't do it all ourselves. And I think that's the humbling lesson here, is that we do need each other. And if we're going to get through these trying times, we're going to have to work with people, talk to people that don't 100% agree with us. That's a struggle, but I do agree that discomfort, that feeling, is what's going to help us grow as people and as community, and maybe get us out of these trying times that we find ourselves in. So one foot in front of the other, right?
Yeah, and going back to the very beginning of our conversation about self-compassion, that's the foundation for how we can interact with people who don't agree with us all the time, because there's no person on this earth who agrees with everything. And when I was real little, I'd be like, oh, I disagree with that person, and so I'd like modify just ever so much. Well, I didn't mean blah blah blah. And so I mean there's a healthy point where you find common ground, and then there's the unhealthy where, like, I'm going to change my opinion to yours, or you're trying to get them to change their opinion to yours.
Yes, you've really
And
hit that. You hit on something important there, and I think a lot of us fall into that we do think that we have to agree, and so we do modify ourselves or expect other people to modify for us. And we can disagree and still love each other and be friends,
yeah,
and build coalition together, and work to make our world a better place. So that's a really good point, Kat. Thank you for that.
yeah. And I will say I don't think we can get anyone to change their mind. I think the only person that can change your mind is yourself. And so if you're having conversations, both parties have to be open to listening. And if you don't have that, if you have one person that's not, and it doesn't matter who it is, you might as well not have the conversation, because you have to be open enough to actually listen and not to be right.
Right, you're right.
Right. But I'm right.
Yes, this is correct. This is correct. So wonderful. This is a great conversation. It's a big topic. I hope we took a chip out of it, and that our listeners can take some of this, and maybe pick up some of these books and learn more. again, big fans of therapy. Again, that's a privilege, and I understand that. But we always, always, always recommend it if you're struggling. So, all right.
Subscribe to our podcast. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. Those subscriptions really help. They really add up. And if you enjoyed this podcast, text 5 of your friends. Get them to follow us. That's how we're building community. And we would love to hear from you. So leave us a comment. Let's start the discussion. We are in community. And so let's start. Let's hear from you. This podcast came about because a friend of ours texted us and said, "Will you please talk about mental health in these difficult times?"
Yep. So we'd love to hear what you guys want to talk about and hear about, and we'll pull it together. So thank you.
And don't forget, you might need to treat yourself too. So check out our merch.
Stop tearing each other down.
Stop tearing each other down.
Get out of the judgment zone. Wise mind.
Yeah. So you can check that out at envisionthematriarchy.com. We have a brand new design for Pride Month. And I'd just like to say welcome to our community.
Welcome to the Matriarchy.